It is my very great pleasure to introduce today Rebecca Springer. As managing editor for digital cookbooks at Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt, Rebecca Springer creates digital editions of their most complex books. She's worked in trade publishing for 20 years in a variety of editorial, design, project management, and production roles, and has been crafting ebooks since the year 2000. Please welcome Rebecca Springer.
I want to talk about user experience. It's not really a thing that we have in book publishing, but on the web, user experience is a way to talk about the overall experience of people using a product, especially in terms of how easy it is or how pleasing it is to use. And it's really exploded in the last few years as a field where people are fiercely advocating for the user's interests in the product design process. Book publishing doesn't have this tradition, but we do have editors and production editors and designers and typesetters and proofreaders and indexers, all of whom have, as some part of their agenda, improving the user's experience of a book. I started out in this business many years ago as a junior production editor making mass market paperbacks, if anyone remembers those. My boss, Kelly Chan at HarperCollins, she taught me well that my job in production editing was to look out for the reader, to be the eyes of the reader on that book and make sure the experience of it was as good as it could be. And as ebook developers, that should be a major part of our agenda as well. There are a bunch of aspects about ebook UX that we don't really have a lot of control over. We can't do anything about the refresh rate on e-ink screens or the shopping and borrowing interface. When we make a reflowable, we don't know the screen size it will be read on, or the reading system functionality that might be available, or the rendering engine that will be used, or even the CSS that will be applied ultimately. So that's a lot of ground that we have to cede to someone else. We only have a limited sphere of influence in terms of making a book that's satisfactory or even occasionally, hopefully, delightful. But I found from experience that with care and thoughtfulness and attention to detail, that an ebook designer really can be the difference between sort of a haphazard collection of stuff and a valuable, worthwhile reading experience that rewards the reader's attention. Part of the problem is that the reading systems that make up most of the commercial market have been created and optimized for what's sometimes called formless content. So things like fiction, narrative nonfiction, they flow like water into they take the shape of the container. In contrast, illustrated nonfiction, which I mostly work on, like cookbooks, of course, but also how-to, gardening, fitness, travel, decorating, visual reference, it kind of resists flowing like water. Without the context and relationships between the elements on the page, meaning is going to be lost. So we have to exert a little more effort and try to impose form upon the formlessness of the container. So how do we do that? I came up with this little framework for thinking about user experience for ebooks. I can find where'd it go? Sorry, I haven't used this in full screen mode. There it is. Ebook users' hierarchy of needs. Obviously, this is a riff on Maslow. I can't promise we'll get all the way to self-actualization. I'm going to give it a try. So at the base, underlying all the other levels, is can the book be read on the user's device? It ought to be pretty basic, right? But right away, you get caught up in the question of format. An EPUB 3 reflowable is the most universal, but even then you have to port it to KF8. And of course the fixed layout formats come in a variety of vendor-specific flavors, and they can only be read by users of that particular platform and mostly on tablets. So there's no question that fixed format is aesthetically appealing. The ability to use full bleed images and backgrounds and landscape orientation. I mean, if you have a book that's full of beautiful, full spread images, a reflowable rendition is going to look pretty bad. In contrast, fixed layout, not so bad. But you know, if you choose fixed layout, you're immediately locking out a large proportion of the audience, especially those who read on e-ink devices or phones. Users can't have a good experience if they're prevented from buying and displaying the book in the first place. Another thing that can interfere with sort of the baseline level of usability is DRM. For most of us, application of DRM is not really our call, probably, but I really encourage everybody, in your role as user advocate, to speak up for the removal of DRM. It's just better for the user. And I think there's enough data out there now to show that it doesn't have the piracy effects that I think everybody feared. If the user's first experience with a book is something like, Adobe two-factor authentication, they're going to have to be pretty damn motivated to even make it to the content. Books that crash are also kind of a deal breaker. Not all the reading systems are very robust, and people's devices might be underpowered or short on memory. But if your book crashes on their device, chances are the user is going to blame it on your book. And the way you'll find out about it is they'll write a nasty review on the retailer site about how broken it is. So that's probably something you want to avoid. But why do ebooks crash? It can be a mystery. Sometimes it's media queries. Sometimes it's just the Nook. Often it has to do with file size, though. This is one of the the few areas where ebook developers have it a little bit easier than web developers, I think. And we don't really have to worry so much about shaving just a few microseconds off our download times. If a user has committed to downloading a book, usually they're willing to wait a minute or two. But we shouldn't abuse that by bloating our files unnecessarily. And if your book is video, you better hope they're on Wi-Fi. So apart from the initial download time, file weights are important to watch for better performance. I've definitely seen files where the number and size of images resulted in laggy performance. So when you try to turn the page or you click a link, you have to wait for the interminable beat before it moves on. And of course, ebooks don't give you any of that little feedback, no little spinning beach ball to tell you that it's working on it. So that can be really frustrating to the user. And these noticeable lag on page turns is going to get very old very fast. So you have a bit of a dilemma, and that you generally want to be serving up fairly high resolution images. Screen pixel density is climbing and will continue to go up. Apple and Amazon both increased their recommended image sizes this past year. And you really don't want to have to crack open these files in a year or two and hunt down higher res images. So the sort of happy medium that I take right now is generally to have images that are going to be full screen. I'm usually looking at about 1,200 to 1,600 pixels wide. Your mileage may vary, as always. But so with all those big images, one thing you can do to improve the performance is to break up your HTML into lots of little files. I recently had a book where we had, I want to say 800 HTML files, and it worked perfectly. It works seamlessly. I mean, you'd think this would be something that the reading systems wouldn't accommodate, but somehow that one they dealt with perfectly. And breaking up your files is probably a perfect job for one of those little hacky scripts that Balder was talking about. Because in contrast, if you're throwing a full chapter at it with possibly dozens of images, you're definitely going to see noticeable lag. And keeping the file small and the total weight of images in a file small can help with that. And, it's just another tip, always minify your images. I mean, if you're not using Image Optim or JPEG Mini or something like that, your files are bloated. They've got all kinds of unnecessary metadata in them. It doesn't do anything. You can minify without affecting the quality, and there's no reason not to do it. So, once you've got the file actually loading to the device, what's next? Legibility and accuracy. You wouldn't think that the actual text in an ebook would become an afterthought, but I have seen so many crimes against the user when it comes to legibility. First, tiny type in fixed layout. Here, I'm going to give you the secret to making a good fixed layout book. Ready? You have to redesign for the size of the screen it will be read on. Just because the tools and the reading systems and the retailers and your boss all allow and expect that you could just output a print page unaltered and shrink it down to the screen, you should never do this. I know, you guys think that making fixed layout is expensive right now, but if it's worth doing, isn't it worth doing right? A standard hardcover might be 6 by 9. Many illustrated books are much larger than that, 8 by 10 maybe, 10 by 12. Compare that to the tablets. The top one is the Nexus, but it's actually about the size of a hardcover. But you can see how the devices scale down dramatically from that. So if you're trying to cram in, I don't know, 160 square inches of book layout into maybe 63 square inches on the iPad, that's going to be pretty difficult. You're going to have to, the reading system will scale the text down maybe 60% to fit, which is going to leave the user panning and zooming all over the place just to try to read the text. And I think we know how much everybody loves pan and zoom. So I think that's what the easiest ebooks to do as fixed layouts are the ones that start from the smallest trim sizes and target the largest screen sizes. So maybe like a board book on an iPad. You could get away with not redesigning, but otherwise I think you're going to have to start over from scratch in some ways. But so when you redesign for fixed, set your canvas to the size of the target screen, give it a nice generous text margin to allow for tapping. Your art can go full bleed though, so that's nice. And give it a nice big text size, like 16 point maybe. Another factor in legibility is the fonts themselves. The onboard device fonts, most of the readers wouldn't all be my favorites in terms of their elegance and character, but they generally won't lead you too far astray. If you're embedding fonts, however, you really do have to be careful because many typefaces that were designed for print are unsuited for the screen. While you want to preserve the character of the typefaces used in print design, oftentimes you don't want the exact same font, especially for body text. The X height may be too small, or details like serifs get lost at low resolutions. You don't have to, fortunately, you don't have to do this research every time. With QA on the device, always QA fonts on the device, you begin to build up a repertoire of fonts that you can turn to and know which other ones to avoid. We have an actual font expert, Mike from Monotype, speaking later, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about fonts, but in general, you probably want to stick with typefaces that have been designed within the last 10 years or so, because they will have been made with screens in mind. Cookbooks tend to use a lot of color type as well, but it can be a problem for legibility. In general, you need to darken up colors that are used in print for the screen. Pastels, and especially yellow, are pretty much right out for any text that's meant to be read. Accessibility experts would probably tell you you also have to avoid color combinations that can't be read by people with color blindness. And there's some handy tools that can help you sort of assess whether your color combos are working or not. Another thing to look for is the crispness of any type that's part of art. Everyone recommends against type as art, and for good reason. In most cases, it's better to remove the text from an image and run it as a caption. But if you can't do that, you might have to go back to your original source file and enlarge the type, which is what we did here. This was sort of a demo of, adapting a page that we thought was going to be impossible, and putting it in a reflowable. And the first attempt there in the middle was the natural size of that page as a JPEG. And then the second one was after we blew it up in blew up all the elements and re-exported. So it turned out, I guess it's pretty small up on the screen, but on the iPad it looks pretty good. Or you might be able to use SVG, scalable vector graphics. One of their best use cases is for really small icons, like that little clock up there at the top of the screen. You can scale it to whatever size without pixelation. So it looks good small, it looks good big, it looks good. You might also try it for detailed line art, like a map. It's a perfect use case for SVG. So what about accuracy? Poor accuracy, more than anything else, will get you bad reviews and a spot on the Kindle reworks list. Users really seem to hate OCR errors. Obviously, try not to introduce any errors, and get a proofread if you can. This is part of the package of producing a professional book, and I think it's a shame that it's kind of fallen by the wayside for ebooks. I think the bean counters are imagining some kind of clean room transformation where nothing can ever go wrong and the text will magically be transformed from print to HTML. I think we all know that's not the case. So I'd love to bring back the use of proofreaders. Your readers will thank you. Another aspect of accuracy is link precision. Normally, you're going to convert all your tables of contents and cross-references and indexes to links. But while the print edition can get away with a certain amount of fuzziness by pointing to the page level, that is going to spell trouble for E. You place your anchors at the point where the top of the page fell in print, right? And a link going there might get you close to the target, but it's not going to be precise. If the content that it's pointing to was at the bottom of the page in print, you might be 2 or 3 screens away. It's annoying. Attempting to navigate a book using the typical ebook index is this exercise in frustration. So a better way is to add anchors at the heading level and map all the links to the specific relevant heading. That way the user follows them, they end up exactly where they thought they should be. This should be something that is mostly automatable, but in practice I find that it's not. You can do a lot of the work with scripts, but there's going to be some rekeying because some of that information is lost. Basically, when you have the print file no longer indicates, where the precise reference is. So you sometimes have to go back and kind of suss out where those are. Unless you do your indexing in InDesign, which I think is a terrific idea, and I hope it catches on. Another issue with links is making sure they're actually clickable. If you link up superscript, tiny little footnotes, the user is going to be pretty frustrated when they try to click or tap on those links. According to Apple's user interface guidelines, recommend a minimum of 40 by 40 pixels for something that's going to be tapped, which if you make a 40 by 40 pixel icon, is going to look pretty big on your page, but I don't think there's really any way around it because those tiny superscripts just are not happening. So up the ladder, next level, semantics. The semantic markup is code that actually means something from a structural point of view. Now the user is never going to see your markup. I sometimes have to remind myself this when I'm in there, busily renaming the designer's style names because they don't fit my naming convention, and I can't stand to look at the camel case. But the user won't see your markup, but they will see and experience your book through the markup, and it's better if it's clean. I'm talking about the basic separation between structure and presentation. Heads are heads, paras are paras, lists are lists, and no inline styles. Why does it matter? Well, one reason is when you send your book out into the world, there are back alleys where it will be stripped naked of its CSS and clothed in some reading system's idea of the correct defaults. So if you want to be on Nook or say Oyster, you need to be prepared to be read entirely CSS-free. And the best way to prepare for this is to try it. I typically will drag my CSS out of its designated location and then just open the HTML file in the browser just to see what happens. Does it still make sense? Well, what happens when the floated images come into one column instead? Where do they fall? Do all my itals drop out? They won't if you use M-class ital instead of span-class ital. If your markup is full of P-class chapter title or P-class list, it's going to fail this test spectacularly. With HTML5, there's a lot of other semantic markup that, perhaps will be useful someday. There's section and article and picture. But I find there's not a real compelling use case for it at the moment, since none of the reading systems do anything with it. But in theory, if you use these, your future self will thank you. Another layer of semantics are the EPUB type attributes that you hear people talking about. There are only a couple that I find useful at the moment. Page break, which allows you to create a page list, so compliant reading systems can map ebook pages to the print book. It's useful in a classroom context or for research. There's also note ref and footnote, which can be used to make pop-up footnotes without JavaScript. So next, coherence. This is where it starts to get hard. What I mean by coherence is simply this, is related material is displayed in relation so that it can be comprehended in context. If you've ever laid out an illustrated book for print, there's a great deal of attention paid to the placement of elements on a spread and to fit. Art will be cropped, copy will be often edited to fit the page. A print designer would no more break a caption from its image than they would give up their Pantone deck. And why would they? It makes the reader's job harder. It just doesn't make sense. But the reality is there's no 100% foolproof way to keep captions with images in an ebook, save using a fixed layout format, which undermines the sort of level 1 criteria, or including the caption as part of the art, which is not good for legibility or semantics. So where does that leave us? Well, those of you who missed Joshua Talent's workshop yesterday, he introduced a new cross-platform solution, which involves a wrapper div and a viewport height specification on a pseudo class. I look forward to trying that out. What works best for me when I have a captioned image is to put a page break before and to pay attention to the aspect ratio of the image. You can constraining the image width to a percentage of the parent element. So this is an example of a too tall image. That's a problem. So if you have a portrait image that's like this, you can't allow it to go full width, or you're going to see your image, you may even see your image break across the page, or you would definitely see your caption split from it. However, if you set the image, constrain the image width to say 70%, you make some room for the caption and still have some hope of them staying together. I tried to figure out the exact precise right aspect ratio that would be perfect every time, and there's not one. But with time, you tend to be able to eyeball, oh, that one's too tall. But you have to test, always test on the smallest and boxiest screens you can find. And the user can still mess it up by setting their font size huge. But I always hope that when they see something like that, they'll be like, perhaps this book would work a little better at a slightly smaller type size. Let me get my reading glasses. So. Another technique I've used to good effect is side-by-side captioning. Again, it's possible to break this with giant type. You can also see here that square images are particularly ebook friendly. If you have the leeway to recrop your images into a square aspect ratio, I recommend giving it a go. Other coherence-related decisions you have to make involve how to order content blocks that are nonlinear in print, like sidebars, boxes, multi-column layouts, images. Any material that's not linear will have to become linear in order to flow, which is what is going to happen in Overflowable. And generally, you can't count on an InDesign document to spit out the elements in a sensible order unless you've gone in and set them up in the articles panel, like Anne-Marie recommends. But to be honest, I never bother messing with export options in InDesign because to me, it's faster to do it in the markup. Also, you have to watch out for non-paginated cross-references, like see photo left or see sidebar below. Your linking script probably won't catch them, but they will need to be reworked. So coherence can be a thorny problem, and it really has to be solved on a case-by-case basis. If you're making ebooks of illustrated nonfiction, this is where you will spend most of your time. Next up, design and typography. So I kind of want to take it back to first principles. Why design ebooks? Well, why do we design books at all? A couple of reasons. Firstly, because design solves problems for the reader. In particular, you have to remember the design elements like text hierarchy and sidebar treatments are functional. They help the reader make sense of the information. Design also supports your brand. The look and feel of a book reinforces the credibility and trustworthiness of your content. And finally, we design for aesthetics, which is no small matter. There was a great piece the other day by Kenzie Wilbur on Food 52, the recipe site, talking about the importance of a book's design, photography, and layout. I'm going to quote it a bit because it's so good. He wrote, "A book's visuals are a beam no less weight-bearing than its content. They tell the first story. When we get a new book, we flip through to take it in visually first because that's the fastest way. We want to figure it out. What is this book trying to say? When we make a book, we don't pour over spine colors and sans serifs because we like the busy work. We do it because each and every piece of the book, each comma, each linen fold in each food photo, each close-up of a frog is contributing to the larger picture. Get one element wrong and the cohesive whole will feel less so. The reader will hit a pothole and then another. Then they'll take another road." The visual design of an illustrated book is an important part of the message that it's trying to send. If we cast off this design for the ebook, we're left with an expression that is unquestionably less. In ebooks, how we implement the design is with CSS. And CSS is a very versatile instrument. Even with the uneven support in reading systems, there's still a lot that you can do. Custom typefaces, especially for headings, can do a lot to bring character and elegance to your book. Along with a considered scheme of type sizes, margins, and lettings, using custom fonts helps establish the information hierarchy, aids comprehension, allows users to scan and jump to what they're looking for. You can also create a vertical rhythm with a flexible grid system, which if you Google that, you'll find lots of information. Also use white space. If you got a page that's crammed full of text or graphics with very little white space, it's very hard to read. And we don't need to match a cast off or make a certain page count to stay within the print bid. And conversely, we don't have anyone demanding that we have a sidebar full of blinking network ads. Generous white space clarifies the information hierarchy, gives the eye a place to rest, and it's a benefit to the user, and it's easy enough to do. So don't try to squeeze it all in. One area where digital can really shine, I think, is in the display of color artwork, especially photography. The backlit screens really tend to make the colors pop, and you get a vibrance that's hard to match in ink on paper. But conversely, if you have a book that was originally designed for uncoated stock, you're not really going to be able to get that same look on the screen. You might try messing around with Photoshop filters or something, but most likely you'll have to try to evoke the mood of the book in another way with type choice or backgrounds. So background images, this is one, those little dots are background. Background color, colored type, borders, floated images, all of these can bring life to your page and help draw the reader in. Will it be pixel perfect? No. I really wish I could make those borders wrap around the whole page instead of stopping at the top and the bottom like that, or that I can make my background colors be full bleed if I want them. And maybe someday the reading systems will support that. But you take inspiration from the web as well as from print design. The web design community is endlessly inventive, and anything you want to do, just do a search and you'll find a tutorial or a lynda.com video and something that's going to give you a place to start. But don't just borrow their techniques, steal them, make them your own. Any new techniques you use, you have to test. Test everywhere, test on the device, test early, test often. Not everything that works on the web will work in an ebook. But while you're Googling border radius, be sure to do a few searches on responsive design as well. Ethan Marcotte, A List Apart, there's a whole mafia of folks talking a lot about this. They're a great resource for techniques and ways of thinking about making pages that adapt to a variety of containers. And don't gloss over the typographic details either. There's a great book, Butterick's Practical Typography, that's available on the web. Matthew Butterick wrote it up, and it's a great resource and an inspiration, really, to look at it. It's quite beautiful. He said, typography matters because it helps conserve the most valuable resource you have, reader attention. Good typography can help your reader devote less attention to the mechanics of reading and more attention to your message. Conversely, bad typography can distract your reader and undermine your message. And he makes the point that the most important typographic choices you make have to do with the body text, the point size, the line spacing, the line length, and the font. Because body text is mostly what a book is. I mean, maybe a little bit less so in these, highly designed illustrated books, but there's body text everywhere you look there too. So a few recommendations, specifics. I don't have to go down them one by one, but I will say line spacing is something that I always style. The reading system defaults are typically way too small. You want 1.4 probably for body text. For headings, you usually want less, but Kindle's going to override you there anyway, so it's a bit of a futile effort. But line length is something to watch for. There are a few configurations that are really going to mess you up there. People who insist on reading in landscape and the few readers that allow you to read in landscape without going too up. it's going to end up with a really long line length that's going to be tough to parse. So one thing that I've done is you can set a max width on the body, set it in M's. I've tried, 30 to 35 M's, somewhere in there, and that's going to limit your line length in situations where the reader's got a really wide landscape type window. A few other specifics, stuff you guys all know about, curly quotes, use real fractions and other Unicode extended characters. Don't try to hack it out with the superscript and the subscript. Use first line indents or space between paragraphs, not both. So, I'll also embed all the necessary font variants. I've seen so many books with fake itals and fake bold, and there's no reason to do that. If you're embedding one font, you've got to embed its variants as well. So, last up, interactivity. I gotta be honest, I rarely make it this high on the pyramid. Usually I run out of time somewhere halfway up level 5, but if you have the chops, adding interactivity can help solve problems further down the stack, particularly coherence problems, but it can come at the expense of reading system access. So one thing we do that's interactive, if not really super sexy, is to add additional nav that's not in the print book, like a chapter TOC, detailed chapter TOC at the beginning of each chapter. So why force the user to jump around, or to page around when they could just jump to the relevant section that they're looking for? We've also created additional indexes, listing, for example, all the recipes that might have been tagged vegetarian or something like that. And in one book, we even created a persistent running foot nav, which was it was difficult. I'm not sure I'd do that again, but when you're dealing with a book that's got, 1,000 recipes and as many images, there's a lot of content to parse, so we wanted to help people find their way through it all. I've also used things like this little gallery widget. This is iBooks Author, but you could do this in HTML too. It's a nice solution for step-by-step images. There are lots of good examples of kind of one-off experiments with interactivity in ebooks. And I think it's kind of telling that a lot of them have been created by independent developers or nonprofits or sometimes brands, but not too often by publishers. And I get it. We don't have the expertise in-house. And I think people are also really wary of adding interactivity just for the sake of the bells and whistles. And I think we're right to be cautious there. I think that our content is good enough to stand on its own, and that we should only add these things when they really are of benefit to the user. So I hope I've showed you how adapting illustrated nonfiction for E, it's not a piece of cake, but it's in fact doable. But the other question is, why should we bother? This is a valid question. The market for illustrated nonfiction ebooks is small. Many of the books might not earn out the investment required to make them. So why is the market so small? This is conjecture on my part, but I think that the quality of many of the books that are on the market might have something to do with it. The modern ebook era is less than a decade old, and we've already kind of trained users that illustrated ebooks suck. Too many publishers seem to have really low expectations of what can be done with user experience of illustrated books. They lean really heavily on service providers, and they don't educate themselves on the possibilities. And say, too many things that I've seen are people turning out sort of these cheap conversions instead of really considered adaptations of their nonfiction material. So what would happen if we made ebooks that didn't suck? Could we convince the illustrated book customer that the advantages of digital, which I think everyone in this room is probably sold on, the instant availability and the searchability and the anywhere access, the advantages of digital don't have to come at the cost of what makes illustrated books appealing in the first place. I think it could happen, but to get there, we'll have to put users first, and we'll have to put them ahead of the mentality that good enough is good enough. And it's going to require all of us to look out for the reader. Thank you. Are there any questions? His question was about SVG. He's asking if I've used it much and if I've used it for charts and graphs. I've not used it for charts and graphs. I've only dabbled with it, to be honest. The support is not, the support's not everywhere. You can specify fallbacks. Apparently you use EPUB switch to do that. I haven't tried it, but I'm told it works. So you can have a ping or another image format to be used when SVG can't be displayed. But my experiments with SVG have been, really promising. I mean, the scalability just makes it miles ahead of doing those types of images as bitmapped.
One of the slides showed a endnote that was popping up when you. I've never seen that. I was just complaining to someone at break. Usually you click it and you get spit over to the notes, and then you have to find your way back. Is that across various devices, or is that a feature?
It works on iBooks and it works on Kindle, surprisingly. You use the EPUB type attributes and the HTML tag aside in combination. I think if you'll Google around on that, I think you'll find instructions on how to do it, or I could probably find them for you. But yeah, it works well, and it actually degrades really well too. In the places that don't support it, it will put the notes. I mean, you have to sort of put in some fallbacks, but you can have the notes then at the end of the chapter instead without having to fork the file. Any other questions? All right, thank you.